What's the most horrifying, how do you not know how to do this moment you've had with another adult? Story one. I've got two. A girl I knew in college had her dad call once to remind her that every so often she needed to put oil in her truck. She did. Then her truck started smelling like French fries and eventually died. Even after trying to explain it, she couldn't understand that this was directly related to the quart of vegetable oil she had put in the motor. Another time, at another party back in college, a guy demonstrated how to shotgun a beer by shoving a steak knife into it and twisting it. He also stabbed some of his hand. He panicked like crazy, made all kinds of noises and waved his hand around, freaking out and getting blood all over. He was a bit drunk though, and these things happen. He got a bandage on it a minute later and he was fine. Story two. I had a roommate at university whose cooking method was to put baked beans in a Tupperware container, seal the lid, turn on the microwave, and wait until the lid popped and exploded beans everywhere. Then they were considered cooked. Edit. Well, this kind of blew up way more than I expected. So in light of that, I'll share another story of his cooking methods. One time I came home to find the oven on and smoking a bit. I opened the door to find what was an entire lasagna bubbling on the bottom of the oven. He had bought himself a frozen lasagna. Step 1. Remove outer packaging. Step 2. Place on middle tray of preheated oven. He literally thought that outer packaging was anything outside of the lasagna. So he tore away the shell that the lasagna cooks in and placed it straight on the rack. As it defrosted, it just fell through the rack and all over the oven. Story 3. I was a drill sergeant in the U.S. Army. The first time you have to show an adult man how to shave is a little shocking. The worst one was a 24-year-old male who didn't know how to tie his boots. He had gotten through reception and pickup day by tightly lacing his boots and tucking the laces in. As they would loosen up throughout the day, he would just pull them tight again. The first Sunday, I noticed his boots were barely staying on as he was marching back from dinner. I asked him what was wrong with them, as it's common for privates to have the wrong size boots when they get to us. He didn't know how to tie them. At all. Not a single knot. I spent an hour showing him how I tie my boots in different techniques if he gets hot spots or blisters. Then I assigned his bunkmate the task of making sure they were tied correctly when he left the bay. I kind of understood it. He came from a super poor neighborhood, had a single mom who worked all the time, and didn't have a lot of positive influences before joining the Army. I was a little worried about his comprehension skills since basic rifle marksmanship is kind of intense and takes some focus. But he did well. I was very happy that on family day he had his low quarters tied and was proud that he had learned so much. Story 4. I was making dinner with my ex and her mom. They were talking about how they forgot to put on a can of corn to go with the meal, but that's okay. They could just microwave it, right? First, it took 2 of them to use the can opener, as in, they took turns because the cans are so strong. I looked over and they had cut the can almost all the way around, but not around the lid. It was this weird, wavy up and down the side of the can cut, basically taking the last fifth of the can right off. I stared at them but didn't say anything because, hey, not my house. They've gotten this far, so why point it out now? I went back to what I was doing. Moments later, they congratulated themselves and moved on to the next step, which apparently to both of them was just sticking the can straight into the microwave. Seconds later, there were lots of bright flashes. Both of them leaped away from the microwave, so I had to come around the table and perform the oh-so-heroic task of hitting the open button and stopping the potential meltdown. The rest of the dinner was them being so shocked that metal reacts like that in a microwave. Even forks or spoons. They were amazed it had never happened before. Flash forward a year, and they were buying a new microwave. Turns out they had bought all their microwaves from this one store, and the owner was surprised it had been so long. Turns out he's a great guy, always helps them find the best deals, and even jokes about how the extended warranty is for suckers. Story 5. This is going to sound weird, but managing a budget, or just being money smart in general. One of my old roommates was really bright academically, but he was terrible with money. Each semester, he would start off with a pile of cash from his parents and proceed to blow through it in about 2 months. I first noticed it with his dining dollars on campus. Every day it seemed like he would buy the most expensive sushi option on campus. We're talking maybe $18, which isn't terrible if it's once in a while. But this was every day. It's also college dining hall sushi, so the quality was just okay without even considering the money spent. Of course, around midterms, when his dining dollars would run out, he'd sort of panic and whine that he couldn't afford anything. But what was so strange was that when he would start to run low, he'd sort of laugh about not knowing any way to avoid going broke while continuing to buy only the most expensive option. But he'd also get really defensive when people wanted to talk to him about this. Eventually, when he moved off campus, it was the same thing. For the first 2 months, he'd feast. He'd get delivery constantly, ordering way too much food, and of course, he'd never share it. But then once he'd nearly run out of cash, he'd buy an emergency 50-pack of hot dogs and only eat that for the rest of the semester, while telling everyone else that they were lucky they had money to spend, and how not everyone had it so easy when it comes to money. He'd never directly say it, but there were always a lot of implied insults. Story 6. I work as an EMT for a private company, so we mostly deal with nursing homes and the elderly. One day when I was about 6 to 8 months in, I got assigned a partner who was in my orientation class. He was a little older than me at the time, like mid-20s, but he seemed a little childish. Maybe he's just sheltered, I think to myself. Anyways, we got a patient I've had a few times before. She was a sweet little old lady with COPD and CHF living at an assisted living. Call was for pneumonia. She's prone to this stuff, so it wasn't a huge deal. Slap her on oxygen and keep her sitting up till we get to the hospital. The first red flag, though, was this kid didn't know anything. He didn't know how to take a blood pressure. He couldn't find the medical history or medication on the paperwork, which is clearly labeled. He didn't even push the stretcher, just walked next to it with a hand on it. When I asked him about all that, he said, "My partners usually do that for me." So I put her on an oxygen mask and sat her all the way up, mildly agitated. I told myself it's just one shift with this kid. He's in the back with her. And I tell him to just switch the oxygen from the bag, which is a small tank, to the main tank, which is huge. Because with the amount of oxygen we're giving her, the bag will run out not even halfway before the hospital. It's about 25 minutes, which normally wouldn't be a huge deal. But when we pull up to the hospital and I open the back doors, I'm completely shaken. The oxygen mask isn't inflated, meaning she isn't getting oxygen. She's pale as a sheet. I can literally see her accessory muscles moving, struggling to breathe. And this kid was sitting behind her with a clueless half smile on his face, looks at me and says, "The main tank is broken, so I left her on the bag." This woman, who needs oxygen even without pneumonia, was barely breathing for at least 15 minutes. And this idiot didn't even check. We take her into the hospital. I ask him to find an oxygen tank while I explain to this woman's daughter what happened. He says he doesn't know where to look. I find it and tell him to talk to the daughter. When it's all said and done, I check to see what's broken. He didn't turn on the tank. Story 7. Oh gosh, I have a few from when I first went to university. Living in halls and realizing some people literally did not know how to cook a thing. There was one girl who bought chicken and kept it in the cupboard, despite being told by pretty much everyone else in the flat that it was meant to go in the fridge or freezer. Flat out refused to listen, kept putting it in the cupboard. Don't know how she didn't get sick. Another flatmate who didn't eat potatoes for almost a year because he didn't know how to peel them and didn't want to try. I tried to teach him. Then he realized he could buy pre-prepared ones. One guy decided to take a nap whilst cooking sausages for dinner. Just left them in the grill and only woke up when the fire alarms were going off and the whole building was being evacuated. Finally, two girls who again almost caused a fire if I hadn't found them. These two were actually my friends, and I was looking for them. Found them in one of the kitchens about to cook a stir-fry. They had a wok with about an inch depth of oil in the bottom, shimmering because it was so hot, and they weren't sure if it was hot enough to cook with yet. They were really glad I found them because they couldn't tell that it was boiling oil and were worried the food wouldn't cook. I was really glad I found them because if they had thrown their stir-fry veg in there, it would have probably caused a fire or at least spat boiling oil all over them. I turned it off and tossed one piece of veg in there. Turned black almost instantly. Honestly, I was just shocked and appalled that so many 18-year-olds had never cooked for themselves before. And even worse, that their parents had sent them off to fend for themselves without having taught them. It's actually scary thinking back. Story 8. I guess we were still in high school, but we were 18. My buddy Ferris and I were just getting into going to the gym. We went with Ferris's friend Tom. After working out in the changing room during some small talk, I saw Tom putting on a shirt. Tom put the shirt over his head, but didn't put his arms through the sleeves. He managed to pull the shirt over his torso so that it was adequately on before wiggling all about and bending his arms in odd ways to get them into the sleeves. I didn't take much notice of it the first few times, but after a few months, it was apparent he did this every single time. Tom didn't know how to put on a shirt, at least efficiently. Eventually, we asked Tom why he put his shirt on like that, and he said something along the lines of, "Wait, what? Don't I do it the same way you guys do?" I guess he had never really thought about it before then. Story 9. A girl my cousin and his girlfriend set me up with. Things were actually all right. We connected via similar hobbies and interests. Then about 3 weeks after we met, I ran over to her place for reasons and made a joke about how her laundry basket looked like it was about to explode, to which she responded, "Oh, my mom comes by on Tuesdays and does my laundry." Fast forward a bit, and I learned that she, at 25, didn't know how to do laundry, cook, clean, beyond moving stuff, take out the trash, how the dishwasher in her apartment worked, or actually pay her own bills. It was all taken care of by her parents. They would come by every couple of days and do some laundry, dishes, etc., and she would just occupy space in the area, I guess. I did try and teach her some basic things, but it was a constant battle of, "But my parents will do it for me," or "That's what Uber Eats is for," or various replies like that. I eventually had enough of it and told her I'm done unless she can learn to do everything her parents do for herself. My cousin and his girlfriend had no idea the girl was like that. She was a work friend of his girlfriend, by the way, and didn't believe me for a while until the girlfriend went to the girl's place to drop something off, and there was the girl's mom doing laundry and making breakfast. And I did have a few run-ins with her parents, who seemed glad I was there to help look after and take care of her. Story 10. My mom and I moved in with my grandparents when I was 10 years old. You know, old enough to have learned how to do some basic chores, and certainly old enough to be taught more. Unfortunately, my grandmother, God bless her, was not only terrified of fire, her mother had a problem with accidentally setting things on fire, but she was also a neat freak who insisted on doing everything herself, so it was done right. My mom married my stepdad when I was 14 years old, and we moved into a house together as a family. He was horrified to learn that, at nearly 15 years old, I did not know how to wash and dry my own clothes, iron, load a dishwasher, or even use the stove. I could use the oven because I baked with my other grandmother when I visited, but I had never used the stovetop. There are many more things he had to teach me, but those were the things that really had him worried about my ability to care for myself as an adult. It wasn't that my grandmother didn't want me to be able to care for myself. Her fears were just so intense that she didn't think about how not knowing these basic skills would affect me later in life. I am forever grateful to my dad for being the dad I needed, because God knows the biological one couldn't be bothered. Mom couldn't overrule her own mother when we lived with her, and by the time she married Dad, she was sleeping at the hospital 5 nights a week because her schedule was so insane. I don't even want to think about who I would be if I hadn't had him to teach me, but I'm pretty sure I would have had to live off chocolate chip cookies, brownies, and takeout through my 20s if it weren't for him. I probably would have smelled pretty bad from the lack of clean clothes too. Story 11. This is in part due to being rich enough to be out of touch, and in part a general lack of adult skills. In college, I had a friend named Mally. She was a couple of years younger than the rest of the people in our group, and still lived at home with her parents due to their very strict culture and beliefs about how an unmarried woman should not live away from home. But her dad was a doctor and also had family money, so they were quite wealthy for our area. The sort of wealthy where, for her 16th birthday, they bought her a Porsche, and when they didn't think she thanked them adequately for it, they returned it. Anyway, I remember when the group of us were at some of the guys' on-campus apartment, their toilet clogged. Mally, without really blinking, said we should call our plumber to get it fixed. Of course, the guys were like, no, it's just clogged. Why would we call a plumber?" To which Mally, very confused, replied, "Because that's what plumbers do. Why would you do it yourself?" So we then explained first how expensive plumbers are, and second, how the average person does not call a plumber for a slightly clogged toilet. Mally was confused and then asked, "Well, what do you do when a light bulb burns out? Change it yourself?" And obviously we were all nodding and saying, "Yeah, absolutely." That was when we discovered just how sheltered and out of touch Mally was with how normal people do things. We specifically learned that she didn't know how to do laundry, change a light bulb, plunge a toilet, cook literally anything, or put gas in her car, all because either their maids did it for her, also worth noting, having maids is extremely rare in our area, or her dad did. It blew her mind when we explained that those are very normal things to know how to do, and we ended up showing her how to do all those things. She really hated it, but it did a lot to make her a more self-reliant adult. Her parents really sheltered her so much so it wasn't totally her fault. Edit. Also, just to be clear, my friend is a very sweet, intelligent, and lovely woman. At her core, she is amazing, but the way her parents raised her and kept her sheltered is where these issues came from. She is doing very well for herself right now, has learned a lot, and has generally been very open to it. At the time of these stories, it was still very near the beginning of her having any semblance of freedom, so these examples come from literal first opportunities to show her what skills many adults have. I hope I haven't painted her in too bad of a light, because she really is a sweet girl and has worked hard to open her horizons now that she even knows what horizons are out there. Story 12. Not sure if I'd call it horrifying, but pretty ridiculous nonetheless. It's about me. I just moved into my first home in February of this year. I live alone and am single. Earlier this month, I mowed my lawn for the first time. I had never mowed a lawn before, but I'm thinking, how hard can it be? The answer, not hard at all. Prior to that, I had roped my brother into coming over and doing it for me, but this time I figured I needed to actually learn. The lawnmower is an old push mower of my dad's that he had brought over about a month ago, and he quickly gave me the rundown on how to use it, but I was half paying attention. Plus, it's a lawnmower. So anyway, I go to start it up. It takes me at least 10 tries of pulling the cord as hard as I can with no luck until finally it fires up. I then proceed to begin mowing, and I know this thing is self-propelling. It says so right on it, but I cannot for the life of me figure out why it's so hard to push. The wheels aren't locked or anything, so I just figure it's a combination of me not having much upper body strength and my lawn having a lot of uneven spots and divots that prevented the mower from moving smoothly. I finally finish, sweating profusely like I had just finished seriously working out. My yard is very small. Even I finished the front and back in about a half hour to 40 minutes. Upon reflection, I'm still not convinced that the mower was self-propelling. I mean, I know I'm not strong and am somewhat petite, but still. So I'm sharing this story with friends and coworkers like, what did I do wrong? And they're all asking me about this lever, and I'm like, yeah, obviously I had to hold the lever down or the motor kills. Well, turns out there's a second lever that you have to squeeze in order to propel the lawnmower. Oh. I manually pushed that thing around my whole yard, divots, hills, and all, ended up with a blister on my thumb and sweating profusely through my shirt. Not to mention the few times I stopped it and had to restart it. I pulled the cord literally at least 20 times to get it to start again. I was waiting for one of my neighbors to come over and ask if I needed help. The struggle was that obvious. I also learned about the little button that you push a few times to make starting easier. So yeah, mowed today. And let's just say that things went significantly better than last time. Growing up, my dad or brother would mow, and in college up until now, I have always lived in apartments or duplexes. Nothing that required residents to do any lawn care. So at the age of 32, I have finally learned to use a lawnmower. Story 13. I had to explain and show my older brother that you can and should clean your Phillips beard trimmer from inside the little bits as well. We both got the same exact model as a gift on Christmas, I think. And yeah, it turns out he hadn't opened up and cleaned the little rotary bits the entire time he had it. Years, literally years, at least 5. And was complaining how it was very slow and probably needed to be replaced with a new one. I thought, that's weird. Mine is around the same age and is still perfectly fine. So I turned it on and it made this very gritty sound like the machine was so slow, as if it was dying, even though it was fully charged. I opened it up, and goddamn, the little rotary blades were so clogged up with years-old dust and hairs. It was a miracle the thing was still working at all. Turns out he didn't even know you could open them. I cleaned it all nice and clean, and the thing started working good again, as much as it can, afterward. Read instructions, please, before you disregard something as broken, like goddamn. Story 14. I have a couple. I once had my ex's parents coming over and needed some help cleaning the house to get ready for their arrival. I asked my ex to clean the bathroom for me whilst I cleaned the kitchen and left him to it. I went in about half an hour later and the bathroom was somehow dirtier, but the ex was sitting on the couch chilling. When I asked him why he hadn't cleaned the bathroom, he looked at me all confused and said he had. I asked him to come in and pointed out all the soap scum everywhere and how it was clearly not clean. He reiterated that he'd cleaned it. I asked him to show me how. He proceeded to pick up a bar of soap, lather up his hands real good and just rub everything. He didn't even rinse it after, just rubbed everything with soapy hands, and couldn't understand why I was staring at him open-mouthed. Same guy, a few months later. I asked him to mash some potatoes I'd boiled whilst I plated up dinner. He very literally did so, without draining out the water. Again, he didn't think what he'd done was in any way wrong, despite the weird texture and look of the potatoes. Story 15. This isn't just one person, but I've come to the realization that many adults no longer have the ability to read a map or follow simple driving directions to a new place, as they're completely reliant on GPS telling them when and where to turn. Two instances that stand out. A person in my office building was standing at the door, asking everyone coming and going if they'd seen a car-mount GPS unit in the parking lot as they'd lost it bringing it in somehow. They were sobbing, so I figured it must be an expensive model. I asked what it was, but it was cheap, and helped them look around under cars to see if we could find it, during which we talked. They were crying, not over the price of losing it, but because they didn't know how they'd get home that night without it. They couldn't drive home from their job they'd worked at for months without a GPS telling them how. I was out with a friend doing some shopping in a part of a city we'd never been to before. We were in the parking lot of store A and wanted to get to store B, which we could see, but there wasn't a connected road between the two. Friend punches in the store on their iPhone to get directions, and it gives a 30-minute route that includes 2 toll roads. I thought there was no way it should take that much driving to get there. So I looked at Google Maps and saw we could drive it in about 3 minutes by going 2 stores over and exiting from the back of that store's parking lot onto the road that leads to store B. They could not look at the map and then translate it to the real world, despite the fact we could literally see all the features we needed to follow. He ended up taking the 30-minute route and paying the tolls because he didn't trust the map. I've seen a lot of other experiences similar to this, but those are the 2 that always stand out to me. Story 16. Before the shutdown happened, I was working in a bar. We had this kid who got hired as a barback, and he apparently just couldn't keep up. It was a pretty busy place, especially on the weekends, and barbacks had to be on top of things constantly. After about 3 weeks, management decided he wasn't going to cut it as a barback and pushed him into the kitchen with me. I was glad to have help because we always had issues keeping cooks for some reason. Holy crap, this kid could not do anything. He lacked basic common sense for practically everything. We started him on the fry station, but he would mess up the most basic of tasks. He didn't even know how to make fries. I told him how to do our catfish, 3 planks tossed in cornmeal and flour. He tossed the first 2, but then dropped the third in completely bare. I asked him why he did that, and he had no answer. Then we tried putting him on the grill. He couldn't make toast or toast buns. He would always burn them. Last, we tried having him run center and call out tickets, but it seemed like he could barely read. There were multiple times I had to kick him out of the kitchen because he was so slow or just completely zoned out. One of the servers was his cousin, and she told me that both his dad and brother had to fire him from separate jobs because he wouldn't do his work or wouldn't show up. Then, of course, one night, he was still out back after he clocked out and was talking to someone at length about doing mushrooms and acid. Guess we know why he can't hold down a job. Told him to do something one night while I ran to the restroom. Came back and he was gone. Good riddance. Brandon, if you're reading this, I hate your guts. Story 17. In my early 20s, I was really poor. I lived across from a Dollar General and would frequent it for odds and ends, frequently. There was an 18 to 22-year-old girl who worked the cash register who I assumed was on the spectrum of sorts. She couldn't make eye contact and was very obviously socially awkward. She was also often very dirty and always smelled of body odor. It was always weird to me because they sold deodorant. She also had one arm and hand that was much smaller and less mobile than the other. I was always kind to her, despite her being the slowest on the cash register, part due to her physical speed capabilities, part due to her painful customer interactions. She constantly overshared, uncomfortably. It was what it was. It didn't bother me. I honestly felt bad for the girl and would occasionally see bruises on her smaller hand, arm, and wondered if she was abused. One day I walked into the good old DG, looking to pick up some cleaning supplies and shampoo, and saw they had a clothing sale. Before you judge, I was poor, and they didn't have the worst clothing. The sale was that certain color-stickered items were $1. I browsed and actually found 5 things that weren't too terrible. Some pajamas, some leggings, a piece of athletic wear. I brought up all my items, waited for a while as the girl was at the register, and brought up my $5 one clothing items, a spray cleaner, and a bottle of shampoo, both of which were also $1. She scanned them in and said, $53. I kind of anticipated this, so I pointed to the literal 3 signs about the sale right around the register. There must have been 25 signs throughout the small store. I wasn't angry. She looked at me, and I explained the sticker color matches the sale and they need to be discounted. She thinks for a good long while looking at the register, clearly in pain and not knowing what to do. Eventually, she scans the 7 items again, hits a bunch of buttons, then says, "Okay." $24. I was absolutely flabbergasted. I knew she was slower, but discovering that she couldn't figure out 5 plus 2 should be 7, plus tax, absolutely shocked me and truly bummed me out. Myself and the customer behind me just stared, not knowing what to do for far too long. I eventually asked if there was anyone else working who could help. She used the store phone to call another coworker back in from their break. I stopped seeing her after a while, which was to be expected. I think of her often. I hope she's okay. Story 18. One of my roommates in college was basically helpless when it came to basic life skills. She declared herself a feminist and didn't want to do housework, but part of being independent is learning how to be self-sufficient. Anyways, she came to me one day during our junior year and asked me how to do laundry. She had literally never done it herself before. She also came to me and our other roommates once because she clogged her toilet and wanted us to come fix it because she didn't know how. She asked if she should call maintenance, and we were like, "No, what the heck? Go buy a plunger and deal with that yourself." She still had one of my other roommates come help her plunge the toilet, but thank God it wasn't me. She had no idea how to cook and ordered delivery every night. She never learned to drive, didn't know how to swim. She was incapable of picking up after herself and would drop her stuff in the middle of the floor where the rest of us were constantly tripping over it. And she never took out the trash unless repeatedly asked. She moved out over the summer finally, but didn't clean her stuff out of the fridge when she left. I was gone home for the summer, and when I came back, it was full of rotten food and had to be completely cleaned. She had also left food or something in her room, and I had to call the pest control folks because there were ants and roaches coming in. The thing is, she was extremely nice and sweet, and I don't think any of it was out of malice or bad intent. She was just completely clueless. I just don't understand how a person can be so helpless when they're practically an adult and how their parents can let them get that bad. Story 19. This is gonna get buried, but whatever. I have a buddy who I'm still good friends with but has some personal issues. Not severe mental problems, just an extreme lack of motivation. He dropped out of college, lives at home, and has never had a job for more than a few weeks. In his defense, the dude is one of the shyest people I have ever met in my life, so he deserves some empathy for his inability to work. Anyways, a couple of years ago, my roommate and I were planning a kickback for us and some friends with a bonfire, beer, BBQ, weed, the whole 9 yards. Initially, we had planned on picking up our friend, but he didn't call us in time, so we ended up just going home and starting to drink. Around 11 p.m. or so, our friend calls us and apologizes for his lateness. We're all like, "It's cool, but we can't come get you because we had been drinking." So we suggest he gets an Uber. He says he's never heard of Uber, and we explain it's like a taxi. He's baffled but downloads the app. Some time passes, and he texts us confused that the app wanted his debit card information, to which we reply something along the lines of, "Well, yeah, it's a ride-sharing app. Of course, it costs money." He's outraged that they would charge him for such a short ride, and did not understand when we tried about a dozen times to explain that ride-sharing drivers deserve pay. He didn't end up getting an Uber even after we agreed to pay for it. It was $12. And he just bowed out at that point. Super weird because he was like 22 at the time, but could not be convinced to take an Uber. Blew me away. Story 20. I met my current boyfriend when we were 24, and he still lived with his mom and dad, as he never saw a need to move out while he was single. He had never really cooked food a day in his life, unless it was microwave. He wasn't a jerk about it. His mom just never allowed him or his siblings to cook, so he never learned. The first time he ever cooked me dinner, after me asking lots, it was chili out of a can, which wasn't so bad. I'm not a fussy or snobby person. The rice, though, the rice was still hard. He cooked it out of the packet and got the timing wrong and didn't even test it first. Bless him. I wasn't bothered by it. We live together now, and I've taught him how to cook basic things, but I still do the larger majority of the cooking during the week. On Saturdays, when my son goes to his dad's for the weekend, he treats me to a home-cooked steak dinner, which he's gotten really good at cooking. It's literally only the cooking thing, though. I think his mom held him back from doing a lot of things independently because he got excited at using the washing machine for the first time. Mothering your kids is fine, but at least teach them basic life skills. My boyfriend is really good with DIY and computers, though, so I say that we balance each other out on the stuff each of us doesn't know. Story 21. During my first year dating my boyfriend, now husband, he was living in another town and boarding with a family. The house rules were that anyone who lived or stayed there had to help out around the house, and they were kind enough to allow me to visit on weekends, so I was no exception. However, growing up with Asian parents who never used the dishwasher and always used a dryer for laundry, I didn't know how to do some of the chores. They ended up having a really good laugh at me when they found out that I had to Google how to load a dishwasher and hang laundry. I'm still glad I Googled, though. As straightforward as the tasks sound, there are a lot of little nuances and unwritten rules. For example, having to rinse first, or putting things the right way in the right tray for the dishwasher, or same with laundry, how to hang things to minimize creases or to flip clothes inside out so that colored clothing doesn't fade as fast. Story 22. When I was in college, my fraternity had just finished initiation, so it was time to clean the basement while the newly minted brothers showered and celebrated. I was in charge of the hazing, so I was in charge of the cleaning. It was simple. The basement had been cleaned out prior and was just concrete walls and floors. Easy cleanup was the goal. I handed a mop, not really a mop, more of a bristled brush on a stick, the proper name escapes me, to one of the brothers, and 5 minutes later I looked up from my own work and saw this dude blotting the mixture of soap, water, and filth on the floor. Dude, you go to a top US university and you don't know how to clean a damn floor. He was an Indian guy, raised with stupid amounts of wealth, and had always had servants to do stuff like this. We laughed, and after a brief demonstration, he proved his competence. Just want to get out in front of the kind of comments I'm expecting. He wasn't a jerk. He did his job once he saw how to do it. He just never had to before. Story 23. Worked in the woods doing conservation and land surveying work on a 3-man crew. All of us were 19 to 23, living in the woods for 6 months, doing general camping tasks on top of our 8 to 10-hour workdays. One of the guys on my crew just baffled me with the things he didn't know how to do. Everything that I'd known and said and done since I was 5 years old was brand new to him. I don't know how he made it this far in life. Normal kid, no developmental issues or home life issues. Just hadn't done anything with himself except play basketball, badly, and watch history documentaries that he'd quote at random times, but did awful in school because he couldn't retain information longer than his 30-second attention span. Couldn't use a twist can opener, had never even seen one, was amazed that a stick that had just been in the fire burned him, would cut toward himself or over his fingers with knives, couldn't figure out multiple card games rated for 8-year-olds and up, would swing heavy metal trail working tools around without any regard for people's heads, regardless of how many times we'd tell him to watch himself. He swore he'd gone camping his whole life, but couldn't set up a one-man tent even after being shown, and led through the process a good dozen times. Didn't know how to cook anything. I'm talking couldn't warm up rice and beans without messing it up. Would ask questions akin to those that a curious 3-year-old would ask. And when you tell him something was wrong or not possible, he'd give you an answer like, "Well, I think it could work because I thought about it really hard." He would harass people and flirt with women to the point that I'd have to intervene and walk him away, while the person he was talking to asked if there was something wrong with him. It got to the point where myself and my crew manager had to request that he be taken off our team because we were having to hold his hand and babysit him through even the simplest of tasks. Story 24. Use an electric kettle to make coffee. I worked at a luxury hotel in Scotland, and a group of Texan ladies came through. Real housewives of Texas types. I showed one to her room and she asked if we could bring her coffee in the morning. I said no, as it was too early and no one would be working yet, but there's a kettle and coffee in her room. When I told her it was French press, she asked how that worked, so I explained and she still looked confused. So I ran through it with her again step by step. I told her to boil the kettle, add the coffee, add the water, push the filter down, and it's done. Then she asked me something along the lines of, "So how do I use the kettle?" I was a little dumbfounded because how have you gone 45 years without switching on a kettle? Anyway, I went through that step by step. Fill it with water, close the lid, press the button, and wait. Then she hits me with, "How will I know the water's boiled?" So I tell her it switches itself off and makes a loud click. She was quite impressed by that. Tipped, big, lovely lady. Might be a sim that breached the gap into the real world. Story 25. I've been an apartment maintenance guy for years now, and I have too many stories. I've personally lost a lot of hope for first world dwellers when it comes to learning how to self-sustain properly. If you're buying a house, please don't learn how to maintain your stuff the hard way. If you actually read this, then I'd like to add a to-do list for you because I know you need to do at least one of these things. Change your AC filter. It has one, and it needs to be changed every once in a while, especially if you have furry pets. Garbage disposals aren't trash cans. Do not put pasta or rice down your sink drain. It's like a sponge and can easily clog your pipe, especially oil. Your garbage disposal is meant for soft organic scraps, not clamshells. Clean the bottom of your dishwasher out, please. If there are obstructions to the drain, you're going to have a bad time. If there is plastic sitting near your heating coil, you're going to have a bad time. Wet wipes clog toilets. I don't care if they're advertised as flushable. That's capitalism lying to you, and I'm sorry about that. Those companies should be sued out the ass. I have plenty of advice. Feel free to DM me about anything. Please take initiative. Nothing just runs itself forever without being maintained. The good thing is that these things are made by humans who design stuff to be maintained by other humans. Also, clean your fans, even the bathroom one. Story 26. My first boyfriend in college. Rich kid from the Chicago suburbs, had never done anything for himself in his life. Me being a person who was raised as the oldest of 5 kids, I had basic adulting down, probably at a much younger age than I should have. The absolute lack of knowledge was shocking. He wanted hamburgers once, and I had mince in the fridge. Make a burger in like 10 minutes. He fully didn't understand how the ingredients became food. Another truly shocking thing was that he didn't know how to use a broom. I mean, even if you've never used one, at 20 years old, you should be able to deduce the gist, but nope. Same with how you had to actually set up bills like water, power, and internet. He thought they were just attached to your house and you paid a bill when it came. In a similar vein, I had a friend drop out of college because she couldn't figure out how FAFSA worked. I should add that her parents paid her tuition. She just had to cover the cost of living. There were whole departments at the university that would do it for you. You just had to bring your tax stuff and your parents. It also wasn't her first time filling it out. Considering she cried for weeks afterward, I know she wasn't using it as an excuse to drop out either. Also now pushing 30, and the sheer number of people I've met who think AIDS is the only STD there is. Story 27. My ex-girlfriend in college grew up wealthy and privileged. She wasn't allowed to do stuff for herself. She had nannies and everything to do things for her, but she wanted to be independent, so going to college allowed her the opportunity to learn how to cook and stuff. We both lived in the same dorm apartment building just a few doors down from my place. She left my place and said she was going to make some pizza for dinner. About 5 minutes later, she knocked on my door in a frenzy. It seems she may have started a fire. I calmly followed her back to her place, thinking it would be nothing crazy. I opened her door and there was a wall of white smoke. It seems she put the box of DiGiorno in the oven, cardboard and all. There were no flames, but that stuff was smoldering. I pulled it out of the oven and tossed it in the sink, and everything was resolved in a matter of minutes. But yeah, she's the reason why they put warnings on packaging. Now for what it's worth, in the 2 years we were together, she grew into a fantastic cook. I gained at least 20 pounds because of her. Story 28. Nobody's probably going to see this, but I don't care. When I was in the Boy Scouts, there was a guy who didn't know how to wash a cast iron skillet. You may think, oh, maybe the guy was new. But not so. The guy had been with the troop for years. He had been on many, many camping trips. Usually we would only bring cast iron to those. And since it was usually a small group, we had everyone wash their individual mess kits that they brought and have one or two guys wash the pots and pans we managed to use. Somehow this guy managed to avoid that responsibility for years. To this day, I still have no idea how he did that, because there are usually people who keep track of that stuff. Black magic, probably. So the fact that he didn't know how to wash a cast iron came up when we were cleaning up after a meal. I was paired up with him, and he immediately started looking around for soap. I told him that wasn't how to wash a cast iron, and he told me the whole thing about never doing it before. I had to teach someone who outranked me that no, you don't use soap. You use hot water and a brush and cover it in oil after drying it with paper towels. Weirdest thing I've ever done. Story 29. Living in the barracks in Germany. All the washers and dryers were in English, same as you'd see in any typical American household. The dryers had a push-to-start button. I watched this female come in, load the dryer, mess with the dials to whatever setting she wanted, and then pull the dial off, look at it, look at the machine, then back at the dial. She puts it back on the metal knob, tries pushing that, twisting it, looks at the whole panel, clearly missing the big button that says Start, and moves her clothes to another dryer. I finished putting my clothes in, closed the door, pushed the button, and started to walk away as she was doing the same thing to the next dryer. To this day, I'll never know if she ever figured it out. Mind you, there were 3 other people in the room besides myself that she could have watched to see how to start the dryers if she was too embarrassed to ask. Story 30. I dated a guy who didn't know how to cook pasta. Ruined some delicious fresh pasta I'd been looking forward to eating, and also meant I didn't have anything to eat before we went out. So I had to stop at McDonald's on the way. Then I had very little money left for drinks, so it kind of ruined my night. I told him that if we ever got married, he had to move out of his home for at least 6 months first. We did not get married, on so many levels. And I do wonder how the first year was for him and his wife. He did work overseas in a job that came with accommodation and meals provided, and I think he did that right up until he got married, so it could well have been rough. Another brother became a priest with a housekeeper, and his sister married an incredibly wealthy man with house staff. The final brother is still, and probably perpetually, single and seems to have figured self-care out for himself. But it's still scary how little these grown children knew how to do. My 11-year-old is extremely capable, baking and cooking meals with only supervision, no assistance, and can do housework tasks when asked to a basic standard. This X was my motivation for teaching her, and her brother will learn the same once he's old enough. 19 years later, I still can't get over it. Story 31. Was homeschooled for 2 years. Had to repeat 10th grade, so did 2 years of 10th grade in the 90s. Met a pair of homeschooler kids who had been betrothed when they were 12. Met them when they were 16. Great people, super friendly and outgoing. Nicest people ever. They were what I call true Christians, because they didn't care about your past, only your future, and how Jesus was all about forgiveness and loving your neighbor, but not in a creepy way, more in a, hey, that person looks like they need help. Let's help that person, even if they reject us for it. We won't judge them, just going to be great to them, kind of way. Anyway, fast forward to 2002, met them in 1996 to 97-ish, and I randomly bump into them at the local community college I was attending. They were married now and had been for about 2-ish years. I asked them about plans for kids. They said they hadn't had any because God had not yet seen fit to bless them. Long conversation short, they had no idea what S was or how to do it or how babies are made. Genuinely thought that one day the wife would spontaneously start showing signs of pregnancy. Their parents never told them. When they asked their parents, they were told to give it time and God would bless them in due time. Nothing about the birds and the bees or the mechanics thereof. Also found out they slept in separate beds. Same room, sure, but never the same bed. Never seen each other naked. Never showered together. Said it would be a sin because their parents told them that growing up. So I whipped out my biology textbook and showed them the chapter on reproduction. They freaked out, thought it was porn. I told them it wasn't. They worried for my soul. I told them my soul was totally fine, and so were theirs. I explained that this is how babies are made. They didn't listen. That's okay. I also knew their parents from homeschooling and was still friends with them. I called the husband's dad and told him the issue. He drew a blank, thinking they should have figured it out by now. Natural human impulses and all that. I informed him of the full truth. He said he needed to make a few calls. Gets back to me a day later, tells me he sat down with his wife and his son's wife's parents and had a long chat. All decided that it should be my job to give full disclosure. Told him I tried. He said he would handle it. 2 days later, having lunch with my homeschooled married couple friends, they say their parents set them right but said I was supposed to show them how it all works. Hear this and think, are you serious? What the hell is this Twilight Zone weird stuff? Took them to my place and searched up some porn. Nothing weird, just normal stuff that shows penetration. They both went googly-eyed at it like their minds had been blown at the revelation of what was hidden beneath each other's garments. It was a 5-second clip because, dial up at the time. I was super embarrassed at the whole thing, and it was really uncomfortable for me to be the one to show them that. I turned to them and said, okay, now that you know, you also need to know that this is how every human is made. Even the super ultra Puritan ones like you two. Yes, your parents did this to make you. Now then, please don't take offense, but get out of my house and go home and, well, yeah, you can figure out the rest. But please leave. I am super embarrassed right now. They left next day, trying to avoid them, but it didn't work. They found me and simply said thanks for informing them of the truth, and that Jesus would forgive me for having to show them that. Sure, great, thanks, please. I can't look at you right now. I just want to be alone with my sandwich. They obliged. Over the next month, things changed and their whole demeanor became more relaxed, and they got even more lovey with each other. 3 months later, she had gained weight. You know where this is going. They now have 5 kids, one of whom is graduating high school in 2 years. Everyone is doing great, but yeah, having to explain the birds and the bees to a married couple was surreal and weird as all hell. Story 32. How to use a dishwasher. I witnessed 2 men, at the age where retirement is looming, fail to use a dishwasher. I could perhaps even count a third one, but his mistake was a bit more understandable. After we were done with a shift, we used to wash the dishes that we had used during the shift. When we arrived at work, we would take the dishes out and put them in the cupboard. One of the dudes on the shift before us had put in a dishwasher tablet without removing the plastic. That's the dude I'm giving the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps thinking it was the type where the plastic melts in contact with water. The 2 guys on my shift, however, are bona fide idiots. They saw the dirty dishes and the wrapped dishwasher tablet in the machine, laughed and called the guy who did it a moron. One of them unwraps the tablet, tosses it inside the machine, and then fills the cup that should house the tablet up with dishwasher soap for good measure. And the other guy watches and concurs that this is how he usually does it as well, because his dishes always came out shiny when he did that. I tried to tell them that it was a huge mistake, but according to them, I had no idea what I was talking about. Half an hour later, the entire kitchen and half the control room were covered in thick foam, just as I had told them would happen, and they still maintained that it had to be something wrong with the machine. How have those 2 knuckleheads made it through life and into such a well-paid job being that clueless? The same 2 guys also discussed hookers in Thailand and how there was no chance to get AIDS from them as long as they pissed themselves and smeared it over their nether regions when they were done. Those 2 always had the solution to everything, absolutely infuriating to work with. They always backed each other's outlandish claims with such conviction it made other people question themselves. Story 33. Back in engineering uni, senior design, got put in a group with a few kids who were up for valedictorian or whatever. They didn't get that watts and watt hours were different things. They were trying to compare inverter wattage and battery capacity as if they were the same spec across multiple options in component selection. When it came to the physical design, they wanted to mount the solar panel on a scissor lift to get it closer to the sun and generate more power. Their grades and family connections had them getting interviews at some of the big firms before they graduated. I always wonder if one of them has ended up designing something my life may depend on. Then I think about how many other people like that are out there. Then I have a bright ray of hope and think that maybe they'll end up working under good mentors. Then I have a dark ray of unhope and think that a lot of the people that could be their mentors are people who got there with the same kinds of connections and look busy hustle that has managed to avoid being truly challenged up to that point. Story 34. I stayed at an ED ward, eating disorder, not erectile dysfunction, for 2 months, and some days it felt like the clients had to babysit the staff members. Our daily routine involved sitting down to eat 6 times a day. We were all in another room working on schoolwork as 2 staff members prepared our evening snacks. One client had ordered popcorn. How did I know? The smoke alarms went blaring 5 minutes before we were about to eat. Me and the other clients rushed into the kitchen shock dining room, which was against ward rules, and also we broke the no running rule, to find black smoke billowing from the microwave. Turns out a staff member misread the instructions and put the popcorn in for 13 minutes instead of a minute and 30 seconds. They kicked us out of the kitchen and opened the windows, which set off more alarms. All the windows had alarms on them, so we wouldn't, jump out, either to run away or kill ourselves. One client suffered severe panic attacks and had a major one because of the overstimulation. Story 35. I once came home from a day at class to find my roommate frantically knocking on my elderly neighbor's door. I say hi and ask what's up. Apparently there was a beeping noise in the house all day. She didn't know how to fix it, and she couldn't get anything done with the distraction. Quick background info. She was crazy. She couldn't work if there was any noise. The quiet floor in the library was too loud for her. She got mad if the rest of us would chat in the kitchen while making food during her 2 weeks of midterms. She complained for a month when another roommate Skyped a friend from her room one time. She accused a different roommate of having so loudly she couldn't sleep when they had a friend over to do a project. Living with her was a lot. We go inside to investigate, and it sounds like a fire alarm battery is dead. I check all the fire alarms, and they're fine. Before I can do anything else, she breaks down into tears. She tells me she tried calling the landlord, but he was out of town until the next day, and it wasn't an emergency, and she just can't take it anymore. She's on the floor crying at this point. I ask where the carbon monoxide detector is. She had no idea what that was. I found it, took the battery out, and replaced it. Problem solved. Another aside, her mom was a landlord in her home city but traveled for work. When her mom was gone, her summer job was to maintain the property and be on call for the tenants. I'm not religious, but I thank God they never actually needed anything from her. Story 36. When I got married, I hadn't realized just how many domestic tasks I considered simple that my wife didn't know. I have been slowly teaching her, and this is of course told with love, but there are some standout stories. She had seen me making popcorn on the stove instead of just using microwave bags and decided to give it a go while home alone. I came home to a smoky, smelly house because she put a layer of oil in the pot, put the lid on it to heat up, and walked away. She came back and took the lid off, only to have it ignite, so she put the lid right back on, thought the fire was gone, and did the same thing again. She then proudly told me how she put it out by running the flaming pot under the tap. I told her she was lucky she had burned all the oil away and gave her a fire safety lesson, including showing her how to use an extinguisher and a fire blanket. She tried to bake some cookies and asked why they kept burning on the edges. I suggested she turn down the temperature of the oven, to which she replied, "I already did. The recipe said 350 degrees, and our oven doesn't even go that high." We live in a sensible country which uses Celsius, and she didn't realize the recipe obviously used Fahrenheit. She tried to bake cookies with the oven on max. Over time, I have taught her the basics of cooking, and she actually does quite a good job. Now I just have to teach her to wash the backs of dishes. Story 37. Needed to take a summer course back in college, and I had a couple of friends who had just gotten an apartment and wouldn't have their roommates moving in until fall, so I made a deal to stay with them for my class. I asked them if I needed to bring anything, but they said they already had everything. So I just brought a pot, a frying pan, a spatula, and a sleeping bag, since I was more or less planning to camp in one of their empty rooms for a month. First lesson came when one of them wanted to make eggs, but didn't actually know how to cook scrambled eggs. Okay, no big deal. Not every high schooler cooks, and the dorms don't exactly encourage it. Do you have a frying pan? No? Okay, use mine. Do you have a spatula? No? Okay, use mine. Do you have butter? What about cooking oil? Olive oil? Pam? Anything. Sesame seed oil? Well, that will work. Turns out their entire kitchen operation consisted of one electric wok, an ice cream maker, a dull-as-hell fake ceremonial dagger, complete with glass jewels on the hilt and sheath, and a bottle of sesame seed oil. Also, the only thing either of them knew how to cook was bacon. I spent a month teaching two 20-year-olds how not to starve, and to this day, sesame seed oil takes me back to the summer when everything tasted like sesame. This is not to say that they were entirely helpless. They did manage to make vodka ice cream with crushed atomic fireball jawbreakers as the flavoring. It never really set up thanks to the alcohol content. But on the culinary scoreboard, I wouldn't call it a failure either. Story 38. How to use a broom. This person had no idea how to mechanically operate a broom. Unsure how to hold it, where to point it, or what kind of movements one might employ when using this strange stick-like apparatus. We were both doing some volunteer work that involved cleaning up a house. They had a good attitude and were willing to do anything, but when asked if they would like to take care of this or that, they had no idea how to do anything related to cleaning. So it was decided they could at least sweep out the garage, driveway, etc. I later found the person kind of poking the broom at the ground. At first I thought they were trying to kill a spider or something, but nope. They were just haphazardly poking the broom at the ground. I asked if everything was okay. They glanced around before confiding they had never touched a broom before and didn't know how to make it work. We all have different life experiences, so I provided a quick lesson in sweeping. They caught on pretty quickly and proceeded to sweep out the garage, then the driveway, then the sidewalk, then started sweeping the road. This person was not dumb. It was a good reminder that we all travel a different path, and just because something is obvious to us doesn't mean everyone else has been exposed to the same information. Story 39. I used to manage a pizza place, a small independent joint in a rural area. There are many stories, but one of the top ones involved me having to fire an employee for almost poisoning a customer. She dropped some breadsticks on the ground and thought it was okay to wash them off and serve them again. Wet breadsticks alone are no good, but this lady didn't intend to just rinse off the breadsticks. I caught her trying to wash them with bleach water. We had a spray bottle of it, used for cleaning the restrooms, and an old hand towel. When I pointed out to her that using bleach water to clean food that had touched the ground was a less than cool thing to do, she got upset and started crying, saying, "Everyone's always treating me like I'm stupid," which is a fair complaint. I can see that happening. I would have just reprimanded her and taught her correct food serving protocol, i.e., don't wash food with toxic chemicals, instead of firing her. But partway into her hysterics, she threw a couple of the bleach-soaked breadsticks right at my face. It wasn't the first time I'd had a breadstick thrown at me, and wouldn't be the last. But the bleach did sting a bit when it reached my eyes. You sort of lose your patience with teaching people basic logic at that point. Story 40. A girl I used to work with couldn't use a dishwasher. Like I had to explain how to put things into one, where to put the soap, and how to turn it on. This was someone who had lived in cities her whole life, in homes that had dishwashers. She'd even worked in food service, which kind of made me feel queasy and concerned for anyone who'd come through her restaurant. She also couldn't alphabetize despite not having any learning disabilities and being fluent in English, which was her first language. I had to explain a simple alphabetical filing system to her several times, and when she finally sort of grasped that, she held up two invoices, one for local sash and door, and one for local electric co., and straight-faced asked me, "So this is the same as this?" My brain broke, and I had to work really, really hard to put together a response that wasn't hysterical laughter or hopeless screaming. If she'd had a condition or was an ESL speaker, that would have been one thing. But this was someone in the pink of health who'd made her way through school and graduated. She was 25 at the time, not a kid who'd never lived on her own or worked before. She even had children of her own.